So this project is definitely not my usual clean and simple style, and honestly, my craft table may never recover from this one. I've really been trying to push myself out of my comfort zone lately, trying simpler designs, playing with bold colors, getting a little messy, and just letting go of the perfection. And today's project did exactly that. I pulled out my new watercolor set from Altenew and decided to have fun with it. Lots of color, lots of splatter, lots of experimenting, and yes, a very messy work surface by the end of it. Hello, crafty friends. I'm Revati, and welcome to my crafty space. Today, we are going to be playing with some of these tube watercolors by Altenew. Now, I have worked with watercolors before while creating floral arrangements in my usual clean and simple style, but those were mostly watercolor palettes or watercolor brush markers. This is actually the very first time that I will be using tube watercolors, so I'm really excited and maybe just a little nervous to experiment with them today. Now, I picked up this beautiful rainbow collection, and in today's video, we are not only going to unbox these gorgeous colors, but we will also be creating a swatch chart together so we can really see how these colors perform. And of course, we couldn't stop there because I'll also be creating a fun project using one of my absolute favorite techniques, which is ink smushing. So, if you love bright colors, watercolor texture, a little bit of creative mess, and seeing someone experiment in real time, stick around because this is going to be so much fun. I went ahead and pulled all of the tubes out of the packaging and just look at all of these beautiful colors. We have this gorgeous shade of violet, two beautiful shades of from the blue family, a lovely green followed by yellow, and of course a vibrant red. I also have a bright vibrant white as well. Now, each of these watercolor tubes contain 8 ml of the product, and from everything that I've seen while creating this project, they are designed to give you a really rich, vibrant color while still keeping that soft, transparent watercolor look that makes watercolors so beautiful in the first place. Now, initially, I had planned on doing some simple watercoloring, the kind of floral coloring I would normally create for my clean and simple cards. But the moment I started playing with these colors and saw how intense and vibrant they were, my plans completely changed. I decided to fully embrace the mess and turn this into a colorful, crafty experiment with some fun ink smooshing. And then instead of stopping there, I painted right over all of that gorgeous background to create the beautiful contrast and really make the floral image pop. And honestly, this project became such a fun reminder that sometimes stepping out of your comfort zone can lead to the most beautiful results. As always, I'm going to start with some very basic supplies that I'll need. I have a cup of water, a few paint brushes in different sizes, and of course, a paper towel nearby because things are definitely going to get messy today. Now, instead of using a traditional watercolor palette, I usually like using my acrylic stamp block to mix and pick up color. So that's what I'll be using here as well. I also have two watercolor panels ready to go. The first one I'll be using to create my swatch chart so we can really see how all of those colors look once it's activated with water. And then for my second panel, I already stamped this beautiful floral image from the Garden Gala stamp set. I stamped it using the obsidian pigment ink and then added clear embossing powder over it so that the lines stay nice and crisp while we watercolor over them. I feel that that little bit of shine from the embossing is going to look absolutely gorgeous against all those vibrant watercolor layers. I'm going to start with this vibrant red shade right here. This one's called the Toluidine Red. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And well, wow, this is a very bold and bright red, and honestly, much more intense than I was expecting. I squeezed out the tiniest little amount onto my acrylic block, and that alone already looked super pigmented. Then I picked up just a little bit of that color with my paintbrush and swiped it onto my watercolor paper, and instantly I was impressed. The intensity of this red is absolutely gorgeous. It has such a rich, vibrant payoff, but at the same time, it still keeps that beautiful, transparent color quality instead of looking flat or chalky. And like I mentioned earlier, I generally was not expecting the colors to be so bold with such a tiny amount of product. A little really seems to go a very long way with these watercolor tubes. Now, since I already had that red watercolor out on my block, I decided to go ahead and use the same shade for some ink smushing on my stamped watercolor panel as well. And if you've never tried ink smushing before, it is honestly one of my favorite ways to create fun organic backgrounds with lots of texture and movement. What I like to do is take a little bit of that watercolor and brush it onto a piece of plastic packaging. Now, this can really be any recycled plastic, packaging from your stamps, acetate sheets, or anything like that works perfectly. I simply swiped a little bit of that color onto the plastic and then lightly misted it with water. You could also just dip your paintbrush into the water and mix it in directly. We just want that paint to loosen up and become nice and fluid. And then comes the fun part. All you have to do is flip the plastic over and press it onto your watercolor panel anywhere you like. Now, when I first applied this red onto my floral panel, I immediately noticed how pigmented this color was. So before it dried completely, I grabbed my paper towel and gently lifted a little bit of that ink or color from the paper. And honestly, I love the result. You can see how beautifully the pigments settled into the watercolor paper, leaving behind all of that gorgeous texture and variation in color. It gives such an effortless, artistic look with very little effort. Now I'm going to continue the same exact process with all the different colors from the collection, creating my swatches first and then adding little bits of colors onto my floral background using the same ink smooshing technique. After that gorgeous red, the next shade I pulled out is called Opera Lemon, and well, wow, this is such a bright, happy yellow. It instantly makes me think of a warm summer sunny day. Now, I feel like this color would be absolutely perfect for bright florals, citrus themed cards, lemons, oranges, really anything fresh and cheerful. And honestly, I can already imagine pairing this with red and maybe a few orange tones to create those beautiful sunrise style backgrounds with lots of warmth and glow. I added a tiny bit of color on my acrylic block and swiped it onto my watercolor panel. And then, just like we did before, I added slightest bit of that ink on my plastic sheet, added water, and then smushed it on my panel. This time I did not lift any of that color with my paper towel because I absolutely love the intensity of that yellow. Next up is this beautiful shade of green called the phthalo green, and this color is absolutely stunning. It's that vibrant, energetic green with a cool bluish tone to it that feels so rich and bold once it's activated with water. It feels like this shade would be perfect for painting lush foliage, tropical leaves, botanical scenes, and even bold abstract backgrounds like what we are creating here. Once again, I added a tiny bit of color onto my acrylic block, activated that with water, and then created my swatch, and then went in for that ink smushing effect. And honestly, at this point, I was starting to really fall in love with how vibrant and expressive these watercolor backgrounds are becoming. Moving into the blue color family, the first shade I have is the phthalo blue, which is a brilliant, cool toned blue with that slight green undertone, and it gives such an intense, vibrant color with that incredible clarity once mixed with water. This definitely is one of those bold statement blues, which I feel would be perfect for skies, ocean, underwater scenes, and even abstract backgrounds. Well, at this point, the panel is starting to look beautifully messy in its best possible way, with all those bright colors blending and overlapping to create such a beautiful texture and movement. I added this blue to the left side of the panel, and we will be using our next shade of blue, which is the Prussian blue, to the right side of the panel. Next up is this Prussian blue, and this one is quite close to the phthalo blue in the blue family. But it definitely has its own unique personality. Both are gorgeous, cool tone blues, but where the phthalo is more bright, vibrant, and very intense, the Prussian blue feels slightly deeper, richer, and slightly more muted in comparison. It also carries that subtle greenish undertone, which makes it so interesting to work with because it can shift beautifully depending on how much water you use. I feel like this shade would be perfect for creating deep shadows, moody night skies, ocean depths, and even more vintage or muted watercolor palettes. It's one of those colors that adds instant depth without overpowering the rest of the design. And last but not the least, I have this beautiful shade of violet called the Quinacridone Violet. Now, this one I feel shows up as a warm, rich, rosy purple and honestly adds so much elegance to the entire palette. It has such a soft but vibrant feel at the same time, which makes it so versatile color to work with. I think this is one of those must have shades, and I would definitely mix it with greens to create beautiful natural looking shadows, or blend it with yellows and oranges to get that gorgeous dusky sunset inspired tones. And of course, you can combine it with other purples and mauves. It just melds into that dreamy floral watercolor effect. I added this shade onto my panel. At this point, everything was starting to come together into its really vibrant, expressive mix of color, full of movement and contrast and personality. Well, our background is now ready, and I'm absolutely loving how this turned out. Now, I did notice that my stamped floral image was starting to feel a bit lost in all that beautiful color and texture. So I decided to do something very intentional. I'm going to use the same exact colors that I used for the background, but this time I'll deepen them and layer them directly onto the stamped image. Now, usually at this stage, I would bring in a lot of variation, blending in different inks, building soft transitions, and using lighter tones to create highlights and shadows for depth. But today, my goal is a little different. I don't want to overcomplicate it. I simply wanted that the stamped image should stand out clearly against this beautiful, vibrant, yet messy background. So instead, I'm just going to take the same colors that I used already, but use them in their most concentrated form and layer them right over the floral image. I'm basically matching the background colors and reinforcing them on top of that stamped design. No fancy techniques, no advanced watercolor blending, just a bold, rich layer of pigment to help the floral image pop forward and hold its own against that beautiful, expressive, ink smushed background. Now, if I'm being completely honest, I think that moment really taught me something about working with such highly pigmented watercolors in a mixed media style like this. When I lifted that red earlier, it definitely helped create a bit more balance on the background, but I didn't repeat that step for the other colors, especially the blues. And I could really feel the difference when I started layering the colors on the stamped image. The blue in particular was so strong and so saturated that it almost wanted to dominate everything underneath it. And instead of giving me those soft layer transitions that I was expecting, it created a bit more resistance when I tried to build up the image on top. But again, this is exactly what experimenting looks like. It's not always smooth and predictable, especially when you're combining techniques like ink smushing and watercolor layering all in one project. And I think the important thing for me was not to overthink it in the moment. I could have easily stopped, reworked parts, and tried to fix it in a very controlled way. But I didn't want to lose all that playful energy of the project. So I just kept going layer by layer, adjusting where I could and letting the process guide the outcome rather than trying to get a forced perfection. And honestly, that's where things started to feel a little more freeing because once I stopped expecting it to look a certain way, which is something that I usually do with my normal clean and simple card designs, here I actually started appreciating the textures and the unpredictability of it all. Once I was done, I have to say I was really happy with how this design turned out. And it was a good reminder that even though this isn't my usual style of card making, it's exactly the kind of project that helps me step out of my comfort zone and just explore without overthinking. And of course, how could I forget my splatters? I went in with a white watercolor tube and added some final splatters right over the entire piece. This just helps break some of that intensity, adds a bit of softness, and brings everything together in a more cohesive way. And I always feel like splatters are that little final touch that makes the project feel more alive and a little more effortless. So before doing anything else, I'm going to let this completely dry, and then I'll go ahead and trim the panel down and adhere it to my card base to finish off the project, and then also add a little sentiment strip which again came from the same Garden Gala stamp set. And well, that's it for today's project. I am really glad I stepped out of my comfort zone with this one. It was messy, colorful, a little unpredictable, but so much fun to create. If you enjoyed this, make sure to check out my playlist where I have shared more fun watercolor techniques and crafty experiments you can try as well. Now, I will be sure to leave links to all the supplies that I used to create this particular card along with links to all those beautiful watercolors. Please know that all of those links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I'll get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Thank you again for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe.